knowledge and taking action. What is education and what is the purpose of it? In the famous book How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's a quote. It goes like this: "The great aim of education is action, not knowledge." And it's by Herbert Spencer. What the quote means is that if we don't take action on the knowledge that we learned, then the act and time spent acquiring it was wasted. It doesn't matter if the knowledge you learned was from a teacher or a book. If you don't use it, you lose it. It's kind of like filling a bucket with water, but the bucket has a hole near the bottom, and so it would keep emptying even though you fill it time and time again. So again, the main idea is if we don't take action, the knowledge itself and the act and time acquiring it is wasted. But there are 3 exceptions. Exception number 1 would be if you happen to be a type of person who just loves to learn random things, even though you know that you very likely will never act or implement on it. There's a certain category of people who are intrinsically motivated by the act of learning itself, regardless of its usefulness in their lives. Maybe they find intellectual stimulation pleasurable or such. But again, it's important to understand how the human memory works here. The sad reality is that the vast majority of the knowledge we obtain is forgotten with the passage of time. So in the future video I will go through this with Ebenhei's forgetting curve. Exception number 2. Actions can be defined in different ways. Thinking about your favorite topic can be seen as an action. Then if you read or learn something about a topic that you already spent a lot of time thinking about, it could be seen as though you're acting upon that knowledge. Kind of like that you have a hobby, but an intellectual hobby. So for example, let's say that you find a topic fascinating. You love to learn more about it and understand exactly how it works. This type of hobby might not have any direct practical application, but it's intellectual. An example of such a hobby could be loving to learn about Mars, like the planet, or a particular time in history. If you constantly think about your topic, that could be viewed as a pseudo-action. And it could also be that, maybe you're discussing it with your friends and, the topic becomes relevant. And it's also like, if you talk about it all the time, you're essentially teaching it to others. And that takes me to the next exception. So exception number 3. Earlier I said if we do not take action on the knowledge that we learned, then the act and time acquiring it was wasted. The third exception is if you teach it. You can teach something and also act upon it, but in this exception I will only be focusing on if you teach it and don't apply it. So if you don't take action yourself on the knowledge that you learned, but at least you teach it to others and they act upon it, then you have found a loophole to the rule. It essentially means that you could be an unhealthy doctor, a fat diabetic dietitian, or an unhappy miserable psychologist. But it could also simply mean that your job is being a teacher or a professor. You learn some knowledge and then you're acting upon it by instructing others what to do. So even though you yourself will not act upon the knowledge that you spend time learning, as long as the people you teach act on your knowledge, then there is some value in the act of acquiring it. For example, a doctor learns facts about the risks associated with smoking, and then he teaches it to others, yet he continues to smoke. He does not himself act upon the knowledge because he keeps smoking, but he's using the knowledge to teach it to others and they act upon it. But how do we know if the knowledge being taught is true or not? It's a most relevant question because if someone teaches something that's untrue or harmful, then all of the practical value is gone. And of course, this would also mean that the time spent acquiring the knowledge was wasted. This last part of the video will discuss how to know if what someone is teaching is true, and then there will be a summary at the end and some conclusions. So let's look at 5 skeptical questions that you can ask to see if what somebody's teaching is actually true. We'll refer to the person sharing the knowledge as the teacher, but it could literally be anyone sharing what they learned, like as a doctor or a sports coach. Okay, so number one, here's the first question. If the teacher never tried it, then how would he even know if the knowledge truly works? One could argue that the teacher wouldn't know because he never tried to see if his boat design was actually able to build a boat that floats. But what would he say in his defense? The teacher's counter-argument would be that people can testify that they have been able to apply his teaching successfully and that it helped them. So perhaps the teacher never applied his own knowledge, but other people have tried his knowledge and advice and it worked for them. In other words, people can attest to the fact that the boat design actually works in real life. Question number two. What if the teacher tried applying his advice and knowledge, but it didn't work in reality for him? Kind of like a chef who's not willing to eat his own food. In this case, that might mean that the knowledge is false, in other words, the food is bad. But if the knowledge is false, then that obviously means that it's not helpful. And that would mean that the teacher fooled himself. He wasted his time when he was learning something he didn't apply. But we're jumping to conclusions here. Remember, there's a separation between knowing and applying. And the same counter-argument still holds true. If people can testify that they have been able to apply it successfully and it helped them, it doesn't matter if the teacher himself wasn't able to do so. So perhaps the teacher failed when he tried, but more people have tried the knowledge and advice and it worked for them. Let's go to question number three. Perhaps the teacher is unwilling, not unable to apply his own knowledge. In other words, he could apply his own knowledge to his own life, but he doesn't want to do it for some reason. How do we know if the teacher even wants to apply his own knowledge? Let's propose that the teacher doesn't want to apply it. Why could that be? Perhaps the teacher knows it will cause harm to others and his intention is to cause harm. But what would he say in his defense? Real people can testify that they have been able to apply his advice successfully and it helped them. People have tried his knowledge and advice and it worked for them. Question number four. What if the teacher doesn't know or simply doesn't care if his teachings are harmful? For example, he just cares about making money or keeping his job. For example, if you're talking with an insurance agent, like technically he is your teacher because he's telling you what to do, but he also doesn't care if what he's teaching you is true or not. What's the counter-argument? You guessed it, it doesn't matter as long as real people can testify that they have been able to apply it successfully and that it helped them. Last question. Number 5. What if something unforeseen happens when the knowledge is applied in a real-life scenario? One problem solved often leads to new situations and issues, and the teacher wouldn't know about this new set of problems because he never tried for himself to see what happens. So let's look at this example. The instructor in your cooking class in your school, who has never actually grilled a steak, reads that higher heat will ensure the meat is cooked through. He advises his students to turn the grill to the highest setting to avoid undercooked meat. And what happens? Well, the students follow the instructor's advice and turn the grill to the highest setting. While the meat is indeed cooked through, it turns out that it's charred on the outside. The instructor solved the problem, but he didn't see the next problem that emerged because he hadn't put his own theory into test. The counter-argument here is that the instructor might have observed his students fail, that is, char the meat, in the class before yours, so now he can tell you to add extra oil. So the instructor is effectively learning from someone else's mistakes, and then he's using those events to improve the material he's teaching. And so this leads to real people being able to testify that they have been able to apply it successfully and that it helped them. So it's pretty fascinating. Actually, the counter-argument answers all of the 5 critical questions posed. And here's a comment on the counter-argument. Okay, so the knowledge has worked for some people, but what percentage of those who tried to implement his knowledge was actually helped? If it's a minority, that is less than 50% being helped, then his knowledge is not certainly helpful. The receiver has to be aware of this, either by asking himself or by being informed. The main problem is essentially how many percent of the people who tried his advice were actually helped. If a teacher had a 0.3% success rate and he also had 1,000 students in his life, he could cherry pick 3 out of those students to vouch for him. But let's pretend for the sake of argument that yes, the teachings and advice is working for the vast majority. Then the teaching is useful. And in turn, the fact that the teacher took the time to acquire the knowledge without himself acting upon it is still helpful for society. But on the other hand, if no one else has tried what the teacher is proposing with his knowledge and advice, and not even himself, then the fear and critique is validated, and his knowledge and advice may very well be wrong. So, in summary, the statement, if we do not take action, the knowledge itself and the act and time spent acquiring it was wasted, holds true, except one, if you do not mind forgetting the things that you learned later, and that you enjoy spending the time learning random inapplicable things. Or 2, you have an intellectual hobby that you constantly think about. Or lastly, 3, if you intend on teaching it to others and you have a success rating to validate your advice and knowledge. The conclusion that I draw from this is that Herbert Spencer's quote does hold true. The great aim of education is action, not knowledge. Basically, a lot of the time we spend on learning, whether it's forced or by our own initiative, was a waste. In the beginning, I said, learning something without applying it is like filling up a bucket with water that has a hole near the bottom. But the point is, we can stop filling up that bucket with water over and over. The clean drinking water that we are filling up the bucket with, in the metaphor, doesn't only represent the knowledge, but also our precious lifetime. It's scary to think about, but how many years have we spent learning things just to forget them a few days later? Next time we're about to spend time learning something, let's ask ourselves to define the goal before we engage in the learning. Number 1, ask yourself, am I going to apply this into my own life? Am I going to take action with it 1 or 2 days upon learning this? Yes or no? If you need to pause the video, it can take some time to get your answer. If your answer is yes, that's amazing, go at it. If your answer is no, then you will have to ask yourselves, number 2, is this knowledge a part of my hobby that I'm constantly thinking about? If the answer is yes, then there's no issue. If the answer is no, then you have to ask yourself, number 3, am I going to learn this for fun, and am I okay with forgetting it later? Yes or no? If yes, then go on and have fun and enjoy the process of learning. But if your answer is no, then you have to ask yourself, number 4, do I intend to teach what I will learn to others? Again, yes or no? If your answer is no, then you should stop, because you're spending your time learning something that will be forgotten. So stop wasting your time. But on the other hand, if your answer is yes, then it gets a little bit more complicated. Since you now intend on teaching it to others, you would be the teacher. And because you're in a position of the teacher, sports coach, doctor, whatever, you now have to ask yourselves those same 5 questions from earlier before you go on with your learning. And that would be number 1, if you never tried it, then how would you even know if the knowledge truly works? Number 2, what if you tried applying your own advice and knowledge, but it didn't work in reality for you? Number 3, perhaps you're unwilling, not unable to apply your own knowledge. In other words, you could apply your knowledge to your own life, but you don't want to for some reason. Number 4, what if you don't know or simply don't care if your teachings are harmful? For example, you just care about making money or keeping your job. Number 5, what if something happens when the knowledge is applied in a real-life scenario? You probably wouldn't know these issues because you never tried yourself to see what happens. Luckily, all of these 5 questions can be resolved using the counter-argument. High percentage of real people that you taught can testify that they successfully were able to apply your teachings. If that's true, then you're in the clear. High is a bit subjective here, so it depends on different scenarios, but generally speaking, I would say that 50% and above would be considered high. The takeaway here is that before you give advice to someone or take advice from a teacher, you need to know the success ratio. That's how many had success versus how many applied the advice. Lastly, you might also take into account if you or the person receiving the advice is an exception and very different to most others for any reason. An example could be in financial advice. Imagine a financial advisor who has a stock portfolio strategy that has been successful for 99 out of 100 clients. However, if you're the exception, say someone with an extremely conservative risk tolerance or specific investment goals that don't align with the portfolio strategy, then that successful advice may not be suitable for you. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll definitely be uploading more since I love what I do. And if you have any comments or thoughts, feel free to discuss with me in the comments. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.